Working out alone at night started affecting me faster than I realized. At first, it was small things, shadows in my peripheral vision, the feeling that someone was standing at the end of the driveway watching me, moments where I'd suddenly become aware of how quiet the neighborhood really was after midnight. During lockdown, I turned the covered driveway beside my house into a makeshift gym because my apartment was too small to fit the equipment inside. After a few weeks, lifting weights under the dim orange lights became part of my nightly routine. Most nights I stayed out there until around 11, sometimes later. At some point, the darkness stopped bothering me. The wind in the trees, the distant sounds from neighboring streets, the strange shapes hiding inside shadows. Eventually, my brain learned to ignore all of it. That was probably the mistake. That night, I was midway through a set on the bench press while listening to a horror podcast through my earbuds when I suddenly froze. Not because I heard something, but because every instinct in my body started screaming that I was being watched. The feeling hit me so hard, I nearly dropped the weight. I sat upright and pulled one earbud out. Silence. No cars, no wind, nothing. The driveway suddenly felt exposed. The orange light above me barely reached the street, leaving everything beyond it swallowed in darkness. I scanned the neighborhood, trying to find whatever had triggered that feeling. At first, I saw nothing. Then I started noticing movement. Not directly, only at the edge of my vision. Tall shapes crossing between houses, something standing near the sidewalk. Every time I focused on one, it disappeared into the dark so naturally that I couldn't tell if it had ever been there at all. I told myself the podcast had gotten into my head. That was all. I put the earbud back in. The host was still talking normally for a few seconds before the audio abruptly cut out. Then a different voice whispered, "If you feel like something is watching you, there probably is." I nearly ripped the earbuds out. The voice had sounded like it was right beside me. Then came breathing, heavy and uneven, like someone trying desperately to stay quiet after running for miles. I stared toward the end of the driveway and saw someone standing there, half hidden behind the corner, perfectly still. I couldn't make out a face, just the outline of a person watching me from the dark. The podcast suddenly resumed like nothing had happened. The host kept talking normally, but I couldn't focus on a single word. When I looked back toward the end of the driveway, the figure was gone. I tried convincing myself I was panicking, sleep-deprived, isolated. I'd spent months alone, working from home, barely speaking to anyone face to face. My hands were shaking. Then someone spoke behind me. "Ethan?" I spun around so violently I nearly fell over. Andy stood a few feet away from me. I hadn't even heard him walk up. For a second, relief hit me so hard it almost made me laugh. Then it faded just as quickly, because something about him felt wrong immediately. Not visually, not at first. Just wrong. "You good?" he asked. I stared at him, trying to slow my breathing. "Where did you come from?" He shrugged. "You were just sitting there, staring into space." His voice sounded normal, mostly, but his expression wasn't changing naturally. He had this slight smile on his face, while his eyes looked distracted, like he was focusing on something behind me instead of me. A knot tightened in my stomach. Andy lived nearly 20 minutes away. He hated driving at night, and he never showed up unannounced, especially not after midnight. "What are you doing here?" I asked. His smile twitched slightly. wanted to check on you." The answer came too quickly, like he'd prepared it beforehand. I tried calming myself down, telling myself my thoughts were spiraling into paranoia again. But then I noticed his hands. Andy had a scar across his ring finger from a camping trip years ago. I remembered teasing him about it for months because he wouldn't stop complaining about the bite getting infected. The scar was gone, completely gone. My mouth went dry. Andy noticed where I was looking, and for the first time since arriving, his smile faded. "What?" he asked quietly. "The scar on your finger." For a few seconds, he said nothing. He slowly looked down at his hand, then back at me. "I don't have a scar." Something inside me dropped. Not fear, recognition. The same feeling you get when you suddenly realize the person walking behind you has been following you for far too long. Because the thing standing in front of me looked exactly like Andy, but it wasn't behaving like him. It was performing him. "You do," I whispered. His head tilted slightly, too slowly, like he was trying to imitate the movement after seeing someone else do it. "You're tired, Ethan." The way he said my name made my skin crawl. He stepped closer, and I instinctively stepped back. Then he smiled again. Only this time, it stayed there too long. Just long enough for me to realize he didn't understand how human expressions were supposed to stop. "You've been alone for too long," he said softly. His voice almost sounded sympathetic, and somehow that scared me more than if he had screamed. I reached into my pocket and dialed 911 without taking my eyes off him. He noticed, but he didn't react. He just kept staring at me with that same patient expression. Then he said, "You noticed faster than most do." Every muscle in my body locked up. The silence afterward felt unbearable. I could hear my own heartbeat. Then Andy smiled wider, not unnaturally wide, just enough to feel wrong. I grabbed the nearest weight plate without thinking. The thing wearing Andy's face looked down at it curiously, almost confused. Then I swung. The metal cracked against his face with a sickening sound, and he collapsed sideways onto the concrete. I stumbled backward, expecting blood, but instead, thick, pale yellow fluid spilled from his nose and mouth. The smell hit me instantly. Rotting meat left in the sun. The thing on the ground twitched violently. Its limbs jerked in short, unnatural movements, like signals were firing through the wrong muscles. Then it looked directly at me and smiled again. Sirens echoed somewhere in the distance. The thing's expression changed immediately. The yellow fluid darkened, turning red, and its body relaxed. By the time the police reached us, Andy looked human again, just horribly injured. Everything after that became a blur. The ambulance, the screaming, the officers restraining me while I tried explaining what I saw. Nobody believed me. The doctors think isolation triggered a psychotic break. They keep using terms like Capgras syndrome, delusional misidentification, trauma-induced paranoia. But they're wrong. I know what I saw that night. Something is replacing people, and whatever these things are, they're learning. Learning how to speak, how to behave, how to smile. Every day, they get a little better at pretending. The following statement was recovered from a patient currently being held under psychiatric observation after violently assaulting his friend during a paranoid episode. The victim survived with severe facial injuries. Initially, we believed the patient's delusions were the result of prolonged social isolation and deteriorating mental health. However, something happened earlier today that I cannot explain. While driving home from work, I saw the victim standing outside a gas station. He appeared completely unharmed. No swelling, no bruising, no sign of reconstructive surgery. Nothing. As I drove past him, he looked directly at me and smiled. That was when I noticed the scar on his ring finger was gone.